started though, you guys want some water?
I'd love some.
All right. Can we get some water out here? All right. That's Penny, everyone. You guys seen Penny before?
Hey, wait, she's passed us by.
Penny, come back. So, yeah, thanks for coming out, guys. I'm super excited. We're going to grab some water here from Penny. By the way, we have some water on here. I also see there's a tablet. I think you guys may have heard Chris Albrecht mention. We were using this thing. We're experimenting with a thing called Slido. So Slido is this online tool. If you go to slido.com, put in Smart Kitchen 18, you can ask questions. So we're going to try and do a question or two at the very end from the audience. So we'll see if we can do that. But I'm going to take this little tablet to let me look at that. Grab a water, guys. So you guys heard my opening talk, and you know what I love about talking to you guys to kick it off, thank you, Penny, is you come from very different perspectives, right, relative to the kitchen. Dana, you were managing food and wine for 20 years. JJ, you are a technologist. And so when I think about the recreation of the meal journey and the disruption of it, it is kind of this intersection of old and new in terms of like kind of the way we're bringing new technology to a thing that we've been doing since the beginning of time. So let me start with you, Dana. We had a kind of an earlier conversation. What are you most excited about or more skeptical about in terms of technology when it comes to our relationship to food?
I'm excited about technology in the ways in which it can make cooking easier, more enjoyable, and more accessible. I'm extremely skeptical when it comes to things that seem like more work, loaded with things that I don't need, and cost a ton of money.
So JJ, when you think about it, we had a conversation in Ireland as well. You had an interesting conversation with Lulu from BBC, where I think some of the folks look at what Hestan is doing, or just generally technology in the kitchen, and they're a little skeptical about it. So how do you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the exciting part is I think a lot of these new technologies that we're all playing with have the ability to fill a gap in learning to cook. If you look back decades ago, people used to spend time in the kitchen with their parents and they would learn how to cook. Well, now both parents are working, there's sports after school, there's all this other stuff going on. And so there's a gap where people aren't learning how to cook. And I think tablets, video screens, assisted cooking devices can sort of fill that gap. In terms of skepticism, I would say like robot cooking is the thing I'm most skeptical about, where it's like push a button and it does absolutely everything for you. Because I think that, and I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, you lose a lot of the joy of creation when you do that, when the robot is making the food and not you.
I feel like you're talking about a generation, instead of latchkey kids, they're like, video-enabled cooking kids.
Yeah, I think like it's really interesting to think about the difference in the way people learn today versus like even the way they learned when I grew up, right? Like I didn't grow up with a tablet in my hands the whole time, right? But that's a very natural way for a kid born in the 2000s to learn how to do something. So taking advantage of their way of learning, I think is really powerful.
So I showed the article in my opening talk. People are speculating, will we even need kitchens in the future, right? Because the rising of the food delivery model is happening so fast. And I know I've heard your podcast. You talked about that with the folks from Eater a little bit. So, with people ordering food at the touch of a button, Dana, do you think we're even going to need kitchens in the future? Do you see them going away?
I think that the kitchen will reshape itself and will morph. And I think that since we want everything on demand immediately, a lot of it's food delivery, and people have an obstacle because they don't necessarily know how to cook, right? So if we want people to use the kitchen, the first thing we need to do is find ways to find cooking exciting, integrated into their life. But the way that I could see the shape of the kitchen changing is, it becomes like a snack dispensary. It becomes a cannabis dispensary. It becomes a place where you recycle because you've had your food delivered and you need a place to store it. I could see the appliances becoming smaller because you can get everything you need that day so easily. I could see the kitchen being something that's supplied by an outsider, like Farmer's Fridge, except the home version.
Right.
So someone comes and puts
Kitchen as a service?
Kitchen as a service. And so many buildings that are being built today, there's a kitchen for the building. And strangely, it's almost like the community model from ancient times, where there's a communal hearth, but there's a communal kitchen, and there's a cook cooking for the communal kitchen, which puts a different type of pressure on your own kitchen. And then I think that kitchens, I guess I could go on about this for a while, so I'll stop. But I think that one of the things to keep in mind is that all people and all kitchens will not be created equal, and the ability to personalize and not have just, right now I feel like we have essentially one kitchen model that people plug into, and there's one footprint. And I think what we're going to see with the kitchen of the future is much more flexibility and a reinvention of what that kitchen model looks like for those who really are delivery only, for those who are really devoted cooks, and that is their meditation, that's their way of life, that's how they gather, and then somewhere in between. So I feel like it's the flexibility that we're really going to see.
Yeah, and is there like a lag, right? So, oftentimes when we see a new idea or new technology, it's kind of like an aftermarket, and you'll eventually start to see the spaces change around to fit what kind of the new innovation is. We're already seeing restaurants start to change to fit the delivery model, right? So they're actually kind of building restaurants now with this idea that we're going to be sending deliveries out back. And you see one of the displays out here is the Wireless Power Consortium, where they're saying, hey, let's build wireless power charging into the countertop. Or JJ, what you guys are doing with Hestan, maybe building it into like ovens that come to your house in terms of like what your technology is. So does over time the space itself adapt to the behaviors, which are oftentimes driven by technology, so it's a little bit of a circle of life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. That's how things come about. I think like my concern, and sort of back on the last question, is cooking used to be the central thing that everybody did, right? It's the way that you survived, and it also gave you some level of satisfaction. Is it going to become purely a hobby for some small subset of people? And if so, that's really concerning to me as a guy who makes kitchen appliances. I would like for lots of people to be cooking. And so, to me, if what we're selling is purely like sustenance, right? Just purely the ability to eat, you really don't need a kitchen. You just don't, right? Like, food delivery is going to get better and better. We're going to have robot cars driving around your neighborhood that'll pick up food from any restaurant you want and bring it to your house. It'll be super warm. It'll be perfect. And it's hard to make any sort of economic case that it makes sense for you to be doing cooking at home if all you're cooking for is to get food to fill your stomach up. Right? So we better hope that there's something more that you get from cooking, in my opinion, right? That there's some amount of pride in the thing that you've created. And if that's the thing that we manage to enable with these technologies, then I think we all have like a really bright future. Otherwise, I think food delivery every night via robot Uber Eats or whatever it'll be called will be the way of the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really pretty much halfway there. But I think that what that means is that anyone who is invested in appliances, in cooking, in teaching, in gathering, actually needs to create even more of a movement of explaining what the value is, and really not actually selling the appliance or talking about the appliance. It's really what's the emotional transaction that happens here, because the physical transaction can be so easily replaced.
Yeah, I definitely agree that figuring that out, I think, is the key, and I'm not sure that any of us has cracked that nut yet, right? Like where we figured out the be-all, end-all solution to getting people there. But I think it's probably the most important question that we face as sort of an industry right now is how to create that feeling in people and to give them that emotional connection to what they're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, are we...
we're trying to disagree.
Yeah.
Can I disagree with you?
Yeah, you can disagree.
I can disagree. So, are we moving towards a world potentially where there's like kitchen is a service bureau, right? Where you just have people plugging in, like you mentioned the cannabis dispensary, you have the buttons for like the different Grubhub button maybe. So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because you maybe need to warm the food, maybe need to reheat the food. Maybe there are cohorts, right? Or maybe I'm a different cohort depending on the day of the week. Like during the middle of the week, I'm just pushing buttons and a robot delivers it to my house. On the weekends, I may want to practice. But JJ, maybe you're saying this. If it just gets so easy to push the button, then ultimately I just never do that practice cook on the weekend, or I never kind of dive into that part of my life.
Yeah, or why would you even waste the time and money to have space and equipment to do that, right? Like, I live in Seattle, right? $500 a square foot for a house in the city, right? My kitchen's 125 square feet. So I paid $62,500 just for the square footage that my kitchen occupies. And then I get to go spend $15,000 on appliances to put in it. And then I get to go spend money to actually buy the food. And then I have to spend my time to prepare it. Like, there's no economic case for me to cook food at home. There really isn't. It would be cheaper for me to just get restaurant food delivered every night. But I still cook. And the reason I cook is that, like, it's cool when something comes out right, or when you can impress your friends with something that you've made. And so the question is how do we make that feeling easy to attain, relatively easy to attain, on a regular basis for people?
I think the other thing that we're talking about is the notion of the maker and you being the maker. And as our lives are increasingly overtaken by technology, there's very little actually that you need to make at all. And the kitchen as the maker room is very compelling as the relief from everything else that is done for you. But again, it needs to be its own reward, right?
Yeah, to your point, Michael, where you talked about pushing the button, like, if I go to the microwave and I put some popcorn in there and I hit one button and popcorn comes out, like, do I feel any joy at the end of that, right? Like, I don't know. I didn't do anything. I didn't have anything really to do with the preparation of that other than hitting a button. Like, whether I hit a button on my microwave or hit a button on a web browser to get popcorn delivered to my house, I don't care. It's the same thing, right? So we better be creating something better than just hitting a button, in my opinion.
And are these things mutually exclusive, right? Like, so this idea of the makerspace and technology, I mean, if people see the kitchen as the last bastion, kind of the last holdout against technology, I get in there, get my hands dirty, I'm not keyboarding all day in the kitchen. Can you still see technology come into the kitchen for those folks, or are they mutually exclusive?
I think technology is essential in the kitchen as our hands, right? I mean, for years we would ask the question, what's your favorite piece of equipment in the kitchen? And the chefs would say, like, my hands are my favorite piece of equipment. But there's also a lot of people who would say that their Cuisinart is their favorite piece of equipment, or, I mean, a more modern version. But I think what's interesting is everything that we use in the kitchen, aside from our hands, is enabled by technology. So it is doing it together, but I think it's investing the intellect in the way food is being made rather than the pressing a button. And I also agree that it's not monolithic. Right. And from what I understand from builders, the kitchens, even though your economic argument makes a ton of sense, and we know where delivery is, I think that today, which is ubiquitous, and where it will be in the future, which is even more ubiquitous, there's change in people's mind about the role of the kitchen is very slow to change. So I think people would rather have the sixth toe, which is the kitchen, and say sometimes it's going to help me to walk, than eliminate the kitchen and have no hope for that kind of gathering.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would sort of disagree with the premise of your question, actually, this sort of question of, do we need technology in the kitchen? Like, you have technology in your kitchen. Like, unless you're cooking over an open fire in your kitchen with your meat on a stick, like, you're using technology in your kitchen, right? Like, and if you're using a metal pan, well, you're not using a clay pot, which came before that, right? And so, like, I get this, I hear this comment a lot. Oh, I don't want to use this device because it's technology, and I don't want technology. You're using technology every day. Technology is this giant evolutionary process. It's not stopping today. It will continue on. And so the only question is like, what's your relationship with that technology at this moment, right? Because your relationship will change with it over time. There are early adopters, there are late adopters. That's fine. And so I think right now we're at this moment where there's a bunch of early adopters trying a bunch of new things. Some of those things will fail and fade away. The ones that are good will survive and evolve further. But this notion that we haven't actually used technology in the kitchen before, to me, is just, it's nonsensical, right? Like, there's boatloads of technology in your kitchen.
Okay, so we're totally agreeing with each other, so I'm going to change the topic. You've said that there's a bunch of things that have failed, that will fail, and those that will succeed. From where you sit, which is really at the White Hot Center, what have you seen that, in fact, does make, I mean, in addition to Hestan, of course, make the meal journey much more exciting, easier, more accessible, and something to look forward to, which is, I think, I really love your comment about joy, because, in fact, that is joy and connection, right, are what the heart of the kitchen is, and if it's enabled by technology, so better. So what would that be?
Yeah, for me, just, and I hate to say this way, the power of screens in the kitchen is important. The ability to show someone how to do something that they don't know how to do is just astoundingly important. A good example, we do user testing on all our recipes, and the chefs, we have chefs who create these recipes, they're really good cooks, and like, they'll say, oh, everyone, of course, knows how to cut an apple, right? Like, and it turns out you go do user testing when there's no video on the how to cut an apple step, and you get all kinds of crazy things that people do with that. And the chefs are, like, watching on video, tearing their hair out, going, oh, my God, how can people not know how to do this, right? And so, for me, I think this notion of being able to show people how to do something is really important. And you see a lot of products embedding that, right? Some on tablets, some in range hoods, some on refrigerator panels. And so I think that's one that's likely to be powerful in the long run. Now, the cool part about that is, though different types of ways you can make content for that and the different perspectives you can have are, like, wide open. And so I think it allows for a lot of creativity and diversity, but using that same technology of a screen. And
what about voice?
What about voice? This sort of I don't know, like, I'm a fan of the right tool for the right job. Voice is sort of, there's this hype cycle of technologies. I think we're at, like...
Well, Dana, let me ask you, right? So you worked for Food and Wine for 20 years, and, like, Food and Wine did do a lot of recipes, if I'm correct.
Thousands.
And so coming at it from that perspective, and you see these new tools, I actually agree with you that I think I'm a very visual person, so, like, a voice-instructed recipe for me doesn't necessarily work, but in tandem, like a dual mode, makes a lot of sense. What do you think in terms of, like, these new technologies just to show people how to cook and guide it through them? Is this something you think could replace that paper recipe in Food and Wine?
I think that at Food and Wine, one of the funny things that I learned was that we had, I mean, at its height, 7 million readers, and I got to talk to a lot of people, and I'd say, I started out saying, oh my God, they would say, I love Food and Wine. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. You know, is there a recipe you particularly love? I'm like, well, I don't actually use the recipes. I just like this sort of world of food, right? Because there's such an obsession with food. So I'm not as worried about replacing the paper recipe as encouraging people to cook, because even this dedicated audience, they really loved the lifestyle around the food. So,
but can new formats inspire people to cook more so than, like, an old format, right?
So, you know, to me it's a question mark. Like, I'd love to know the data, because what I learned was that people who love cooking, they figure it out, and it's a passion, and they enjoy the journey. They would enjoy the journey whether they were being helped by a video for something that was a difficult technique, or they'd enjoy the journey whether they were using a paper recipe. But I'm more concerned about all those people who you're trying to get them over the hill. Yeah. And that would be the meal kit people. So, you know, the meal kit people, they want to cook, and the idea of the meal kit is you learn a technique, similar to what you were saying. You learn a technique, and then you can use it later on, right, to make your own meals. But I think that my hope would be that the video would be an inspiration and make it easier to cook, and the integration is a great way to get new people to want to cook, but I think it needs to be made, like, personalized, exciting, and diverse.
I'm curious how you think about those people that read Food and Wine but don't actually cook, right? Because, like, one of the things, I spend a lot of time in a lot of people's kitchens. In some of the nicest kitchens I've been in, right, have these super high-end appliances and just beautiful cookware, and it all looks completely brand new. And you start talking to them, like, this kitchen, it's amazing. Like, you must cook a ton. Oh, I don't really cook at all, right? And you look in the oven, and there's no no grossness in the oven at all from it ever having been used. And like, I see a lot of that, and it sounds like maybe, I don't know, you encountered a lot of people like that over your years, and I don't know, what's your perspective on that, and like how do we get those people to do something different, I guess?
I think that those people love the lifestyle of food, and they really don't cook, and they have so many fantastic options to eat really, really well. And so we're trying to convince people who already eat very well through other means, whether they go to the grocery store and the grocery store is providing them with great food that's been prepped, and all they have to do. I mean, what I've seen is that people think of cooking as actually what I would call plating, because they take charcuterie and cheese, and that's their meal. Or they take prepped veggies and like maybe they'll heat them, but a roast chicken. And so there's a lot of composing rather than cooking. And so I just, not to make it circular, but it comes back to, so if those are the most committed, because they have these fabulous kitchens, what do you do to make them want to use them?
we're going to try to go to some audience questions. Like I said, we're experimenting. So if we can get the audience questions on the screen, we'll see if this works. If not, we'll keep talking. Because I found out, this is one of the things, I don't have the Wi-Fi turned on. So I don't have the updated questions. So, stop serving. It's not working? Okay.
Well, so one question, I think something you just brought up is really interesting to me, which is, if you go walk out in this lobby here, and I'm a part of this, right? The devices you're going to see out there are, generally speaking, not inexpensive. And so we're certainly targeting a high-end early adopter part of the market. It sounds like, based on what you said, actually the problem that needs to be addressed may be providing tools, technology, and techniques for people of lesser means, right? And I don't know that any of us here, at least based on what I've seen, are like laser focused on that problem right now.
I actually think the interesting thing about that problem, when you look ahead and you look at the Gen Z, and you look at people who are concerned about, I think one of the questions we haven't really addressed is, how does the kitchen fit into the entire ecosphere of what people are concerned about right now? At least in the food world, the obsession is, those with less means, Gen Z, saying, I'm not going to have the money in the future. I'm concerned about the environment. I'm concerned about the workers, right? And so that there are all these moral questions that come up, and how does the kitchen answer the moral question, and in what way does cooking actually fit in beautifully into that solution? Because I think that we've had, talking about, the arcs, like one of the arcs we had with the rise of the interest in food, and at its pinnacle, all the star chefs and all the sex appeal around everything, that meant everyone was going out. But I think there will be some kind of turning inward that, on the younger end of the population, driven by money, student debt, and also driven by the notion of, that they don't always want to be out and connecting with people, but the sense of isolation. So is there some way in which you actually address that in reshaping the kitchen for that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a fascinating question.
I think it's happening with food products, right? You're seeing packaging, and people are thinking about more sustainability, but you're definitely right. How do we address that in the kitchen from a cooking perspective? I think is an interesting conversation. You talked a little bit about Gen Z versus millennials. Do you see a difference in terms of millennials? Does that ship already sailed? Are they hardened in their behavior? Or are they still shapeable in terms of teaching them and getting them to love cooking? Which I think they are doing already to a certain degree.
Some are, because in just talking to people every day at different ages about food, and their cooking habits and their eating habits, because right now I'm working with a fast farm-forward restaurant group, right? And so we're all about food from the farm. That's a really millennial thing. I feel like when we bring the farm into the kitchen, we're going to get those millennials, and we bring the values into the kitchen. It'll be very interesting. I don't know that the ship has sailed, but they seem less. They seem apologetic about their relationship with technology. It all happened after me. And I just think that's fascinating. That's just so not true to, let's say, my generation, but they do feel a little bit less interested, a little bit more divorced from it, whereas I think there's such a huge opportunity to combine all these different aspects with the Gen Zs.
Well, we're about out of time, so I want to give you guys a big round of applause. Thank you, guys.